Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the New Yankee Workshop. Today we're going to go to the south, just barely south, of the Mason-Dixon line to Arlington, Virginia. We're going to visit the former home of General Robert E. Lee, Arlington House. It sits above Arlington National Cemetery, right on the Potomac River. The house is filled with wonderful antiques, and there's one that caught our eye. So we'll go there next. Then we're going to come back here to the workshop and build an old pine dry sink. That's next, right here in the New Yankee Workshop. That's right, you're looking at the Capitol. And if you pan a little left, you see the Washington Monument, and a little further left, the Lincoln Memorial. The bridge coming across the river is the Arlington Memorial Bridge, which brings us to Virginia and the Arlington National Cemetery. And around here you see this Creek Temple, which is known as Arlington House. Now it's believed that it was designed by George Hadfield, who was also in charge of the construction of the Capitol. Robert E. Lee and his family lived in this house from 1831 to 1861, and it was here that he actually resigned his commission in the U.S. Army, only later to take up charge of Confederate forces. The house is stuffed with wonderful antiques. Earlier I met museum curator Mary Troy.
Watch your head as you come down here, Norm.
Okay. So now you've taken me down into the basement. Is this accessible to the general public?
Yes, it is.
And what kind of activities might have taken place down here?
Well, and here we have the winter kitchen. If you go around to the right, you see the area where the house slaves would have eaten. And then over in this corner, laundry would have been done over here. You can see the drying rack.
So there were slaves here?
There were 63 slaves on the estate. And in this area, food preparation was done. We have a meat grinder right here.
That's an interesting looking device.
A little mortar and pestle. And on this hutch is a wonderful picture. It was owned by one of the slaves, Maria Syphax, and it was returned to the house by her descendants.
Oh, that must be nice to have back here.
It's wonderful.
And this is the dry sink.
Yes.
Is this original to the house?
This isn't original to the house. This was purchased in order to fill out the exhibit.
And to my eye, it looks like it's made out of pine, and really old pine, because these single width boards, both here and along the edge. And what would have gone on at the top of this?
Food preparation, cleaning vegetables, cleaning dishes, things like that.
And I suppose if there were any water that was left on it, it looks like there's a hole tucked in this corner. They could just wipe it down into that area. It appears to be painted or done with some kind of a milk paint, possibly. Could we open up the doors?
Yes.
Take a look inside. A couple little latches. And I'm surprised by the thinness of these shelves, and it looks like this was just a storage area. And I'm surprised the way the door is made, because it's rabbited. So often when we look at these, they're not. The rabbited piece sits over this frame. They're usually flush, and when the door swells up, it wedges up against the side, and when it dries out, there's a huge gap. So this kind of allows for a little movement. And there's some cleats on the back of the door to help hold it straight. We close it back up again.
Okay.
And those latches are curious. They made no effort to make them the same size or set them at the same height. But it's an interesting piece. I think this could be a nice project for us. So if you don't mind me taking a few pictures and some measurements, I think this would be great.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Well, here's our version of that old dry sink that we saw down in Virginia. I made it out of reclaimed pine. It was pretty tough material when I started, but it looks pretty good now. We also decided that this would be a good piece to display plants. So we had our friend and master coppersmith Larry Stearns make up a couple copper pans, nicely soldered corners so it won't leak, and it'll protect the actual piece. Now the details are the same. I was able to find some rusty hinges on the internet, pre-rusted. The latch is nothing more than a piece of dowel and a little piece of pine. And on the inside of the doors, I installed this cleat, which will help keep the stock flat. There's one intermediate shelf, and there's plenty of room for storage. So if you'd like to build your own version of the old pine dry sink, a measure drawing will be available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. The first order of business today is to take some more of that old tough pine and prep it to make another dry sink. I'm not sure if we bought this or if we were given this material, but we never throw anything out at the workshop. This is valuable to have around. Now the first thing I want to do is scan the board using one of these. It's a metal detector like the security people use in the airport. And I'm looking for bits of metal because they can ruin my tools. Now with the spacing of the holes for the nails, I suspect that this might have been attic flooring. So far, we're doing well. Oh, all right, there we go. There's a nail right there, right in the middle of the board. Now to get it out, I can use a variety of tools. I have needle nose pliers, different types, a scratch-awl, even have this homemade nail puller. For a nail like this, I find that if I just take the scratch-awl and loosen it up a little bit, and I don't mind making more marks in the board, that's going to add some character to the piece, and then see if I can pop it out. Okay, there it is. A little cut nail, one of those old square nails. And I always check it again because sometimes the piece breaks off on the inside. And we're clear there. So we'll scan the rest of the boards, see if there's anything else. Well, we didn't get very many, but it would only take one of these to ruin one of my planer knives. Now what I want to do is to cut these into more manageable lengths. But before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. One of the things I noticed about the antique dry sink was that the material was a bit thinner than I would expect. I would have thought these boards would be 3/4 of an inch, but they were narrower, and I like that look, so I've duplicated. These sides are only about 11/16. The back is a 1/2 inch. The face frame and the doors is a little more than 5/8 of an inch, and I like the way that makes the piece appear. Now, even though these pieces are almost 7/8 of an inch thick, you'd be surprised how much of this thickness I'll lose as I prepare the surfaces. Now, after just a few passes through the planer, you'd never know it's the same piece of wood. And this is a very usable piece. And that takes care of the edges. Here's a group of boards that I prepared for one of the sides. They're surfaced and the edges have been rough cut, but as you can see, the joint is not very tight. And that's not satisfactory. So we're going to bring these over to the joiner. And if I put the board on the joiner, you can see it's not quite touching right in the middle there. That's not good enough. So a couple passes through it will not only straighten it out, but it'll make the edge square. Okay, that's nice. Now this is going to be for one of my side panels, and the top is cut at an angle. And I'm going to use biscuits to reinforce the joint. So I don't want to have any of those biscuits actually come where the cut's going to be made. So I'll do a rough layout, take a straight edge, put a line. And I want no biscuits near this joint, so I'll just mark here, here, here. A few at the bottom, and maybe a couple in between. So now for the glue up. Put a little bit of glue in each of the slots for the biscuit using this little device which meters the right amount in. Then using a roller on a glue bottle, I roll on a nice even coat of glue on both surfaces. I like to put glue on both pieces. And now for the biscuits, I don't add any further glue. There's plenty in the slot. Okay, that should do that. Now I'll wipe off any of the excess glue that's squeezed out with a damp sponge, because that could affect the finish. Well, here are all the panels that I'm going to need for the case, and now I'm just sanding each face nice and smooth to even out any joints. Well, good morning. Today we're going to start building the case for our dry sink. And the first step is to run a series of dados which will receive the shelves. This is for the bottom shelf. Here's the other side panel, and I'll run that one through. When I looked at the antique, I noted that the backboards ran through the sides, so the end grain showed. I want to dress the piece up a little bit, so I'm going to put a rabbet down the back edge to conceal the ends. To cut the slope in the side panels, I've clamped both of them together so I can cut both at the same time. I've installed a straight edge to help guide my circular saw. Now to take the curse off that top edge, I've just rounded it over using what's known as a bullnose bit. Take another look at our prototype and you will see one of the few decorative elements on the piece, this cutout on the side panels. And that helps make it easier for the piece to sit on an uneven floor. Well, now we're ready for a little assembly. So what I like to do is put a nice bead of glue down each corner of the dado, just a little bit in the middle, and set the panel. Okay, that's bottomed out. Now I'm going to add some brads, which will give a lot of strength to this joint. And what I do is, instead of nailing through the end into the end grain, I basically toenail them, angle the brad slightly right in the corner. Another tip is to use one of these squares to make sure that the shelf is square to the side. I just hold it in place while I nail it. Now here's the other side with all the glue in the dados. And now the idea is to just flip it over and get all three shelves in place and then nail it. The way the original piece was made is that it had a face frame, and that created openings for the doors and a place to attach the hinges. On each of the end stiles, there's this little decorative cutout. Here I've cut all the pieces for the face frame and laid out that cutout. I'm going to join the pieces of our face frame together with pocket screw technology. This is something we've used before. I don't care about these pockets showing because they're going to be inside the cabinet. I'm just looking for a strong, simple joint. There's a pocket that's drilled and then a pilot hole for a screw, and it's cleverly angled so that the screws will not come through the face, and it's very strong. Now, here's one of the jigs, and this one has a clamp, so I take the piece backside towards the jig. I'm just going to use the side of the jig as a guide, clamp it in place, and to drill the hole I have this step drill. This part, the small part, drills the hole for the shank of the screw, the large part makes the pocket, and the collar stops it at the right depth. There's one pocket. Now I slide it to the other side of the jig for an additional hole. The assembly is pretty straightforward. A little bit of glue. Just bring the two pieces together. Now the key is to align the pieces face to face. And for that, I use this clamp, which has a nice big round jaw on it that's smooth, so it won't mark the wood. Squeeze it together and take one of these screws, and not just any screw. It has to be a panhead screw. This is a coarse thread with a self-drilling tip. Slide that into the hole and drive it home. You can see it pulls the joint nice and tight. To attach the face frame to the case, I'm going to use biscuits. They certainly didn't do that with the antique. They used cut nails that were just face nailed into the side. I don't want to show any mechanical fasteners, so biscuits are a good choice. Just mark the location and cut the slots. Okay, line it up. One of the complications of using this method of not having any fasteners in the face frame does mean that you need a fair number of clamps. One of the problems with having these thin feet is that when you slide it around on an uneven floor, they sometimes split. So I like to add these corner blocks for reinforcement, and it'll also give me an additional place to put some pads so it won't scratch the floor. Now, while that face frame sets up, I'm going to start making the boards for the back of the case. It's a series of boards that join with a tongue and groove joint. I want to make the grooves first, so I've set up the table saw with this feather board to keep the stock tight against the fence. I'm only using a single saw blade. I'm going to run the piece through, turn it around, and run it through again, and that will center a groove. This setup is to form the tongues on the opposing edge of the board. I've got a dado cutter in there. Part of it goes under my sacrificial fence. I have a feather board which holds the stock tight to the table. One pass on each face will form the tongue. Well, now I'm ready to install the boards on the back of the case, and the only place I'm going to glue is at the very top edge of these side panels, because I don't want this first board to shrink down from the top. The rest of the boards will be installed with brads only. And I'm going to put a couple nails in that top shelf. Now these little blocks are going to reinforce this little thin piece remaining from the rabbet. The doors are pretty straightforward. A glue up of a couple boards, and these are going to be overlay, so they're slightly larger than the openings in the case. The first thing I want to do is take care of these edges on the face side. I want to round those over using a 1/4 inch round over bit. Now I'm set up to make the rabbets for the overlay, and I'm only going to do 3 sides. I'm not going to rabbet the hinge side. Each door is going to have a couple cleats on the inside to help keep the panel flat. I want to chamfer the edges, so I've set up a chamfering bit in the router table. All right, now I've located a couple marks for the cleat. I'm going to put a little glue on the cleat, only on the hinge end, because I don't want that to move, because it's actually going to provide some support for my hinge. I'm going to use an actual hinge as a gauge. I want the space to be flush with the outside, and I'll drill a hole for a screw. I've drilled the countersink and the pilot hole for the screw, but now I switch to a 3/16 inch bit, and I'm going to drill just through the cleat. What that's going to do is allow for a little expansion and contraction of the door panel. Here I'm set up to mortise both doors at once for the hinges. They're clamped face to face. I've outlined the edge of the hinges and scored it with a utility knife. And now I'm going to use my router with a small mortising bit to remove most of the material, and the rest of it I'll clean up with a chisel. This pine is so soft, it doesn't take much effort to remove it. I'm also cutting a mortise in the face frame to receive the hinges. These hinges look pretty good. I suppose I paid extra to have them pre-rusted. Even the screws are rusty. The last piece of woodworking is to make a latch. I have a little dowel for a spacer, and I've drilled a hole through it and put a dab of glue. I'm going to glue it to the back of this little piece that I formed freehand on a sander. I have a straight slot screw with a round head, just a plain steel screw. That goes through both of those, and it's loose enough so that the latch can turn, but the screw will remain stationary. Now, in the original, they had them quite a bit lower, and in fact, they were offset. But I've decided to have them a little bit higher. They'll be easier to reach, and I think it'll look better. That's it right there. Okay, that's good. All right, well, let's take this piece out into the paint shop and give this old pine an old pine finish. Now, over the years, we've tried a variety of recipes to finish this old pine. We've simply applied wax and buffed it out. We've put on stain and then urethaned it. And sometimes stain can be a little bit difficult because it'll blotch. It gets blotchy on this pine, even the old pine. We've also applied just simple oil. But a few years ago, we discovered a product that's a combination of polyurethane and stain. The color happens to be honey pine. And I think it gives this old pine a really nice look. So what I'll do is apply a couple coats. And if it starts to get a little darker than I want, I'll just switch over to a clear polyurethane until I get enough on the project to give it a good protection. And I'm also going to coat the inside of these doors because that'll add some stability to the wood. And here it is with several coats of that tinted polyurethane. And we've installed a few plants. The copper pan has been reinstalled, so watering the plants is not going to be a problem. The wood is not going to get wet. I think this would be great in front of a nice, bright window. I hope Robert E. Lee would approve, wherever he is. Let me show you what we're going to build next time. We call this project Martha's Candle Stand, named after Martha Washington, our nation's first First Lady. In fact, Martha Washington had a candle stand very much like this one in her third-floor bedroom at Mount Vernon. We're going to visit Mount Vernon and take a look at that antique, and then come back here to build our own version of Martha's Candle Stand. Next time, right here in the New Yankee Workshop.
If you've enjoyed this New Yankee project, you may want to try some of the others. There are projects meant for the workshop, the garden, the kitchen, and many more. So whether you're a fan of Shaker style, or colonial, arts and crafts, or Chippendale, there may be a Norm project you'd like to build. Whether it's a clock or a gazebo, a picnic bench or a Windsor chair, a child's toy or a sailboat, visit the New Yankee website at www.newyankee.com for a complete listing.